Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 106.
Okay, so this was a bit of a stretch, but I want to talk about it anyway. And it's my podcast. I'll do what I want. So 106, 10/6, October 6th, 1927 was a red letter day in movie making history. Because that's the day that The Jazz Singer came out and was released theatrically across the nation.
Wasn't that the first ever movie with synchronized sound?
It was the first feature-length film with synchronized sound that was put out to the public. There were short film adaptation experiments to try to get talkies to be a thing. There were like short films that did like one talking sequence or another short film that had like ambient background noise but never characters talking. So yes, this was the first like high-class AAA production, no kidding, this is a talking movie. And they had a new technology that allowed them to perfectly synchronize it with the film. Like I think it was embedded with the projection somehow.
Yeah, I think I only know that because it was depicted in Singing in the Rain. You know, they were trying to make a talkie movie to catch up with The Jazz Singer.
That's one of our favorites in our household. It's
it's a classic.
We'll just have a modern section where we completely ignore the plot of this movie for 20 minutes and have a weird dance number like the Barbie movie. Straight ripped that off for their third act dance battle with Ken. Spoilers for the Barbie movie.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
So The Jazz Singer had a runtime of 96 minutes. It had a budget of $422,000, which in today's terms is $7.4 million budget, okay?
Wow.
That's not a lot for
that was probably just buying microphones.
Well, and here's the thing. It was actually a huge gamble for them at the time. Warner Brothers made this film, and their average movie was only $250,000. That was their average budget, and this was almost double that. Apparently, allegedly, it was so bad that Harry Warner, one of the Warner brothers, stopped taking a salary while it was being produced. He had to pawn off his wife's jewelry to sustain his lifestyle, and he moved his family into a smaller apartment.
One of the eponymous Warner brothers. Those guys have become such a obscure thing that I forgot they were actual people at one point instead of just a giant WB logo on everything that they didn't make.
I like that version better, where it was a company made, what are we going to call this bakery? Oh, let's call it Warner Brothers. Like, who's Warner? And they're not brothers. Like, who cares? We're just making it up. It sounds great. Well, anyway, this was a huge gamble for the Warner Brothers, and it paid off big. So like I said, their budget was $422,000, and then it grossed $2.6 million, which in today's term is only $45 million, but still good. That was a 6-to-1 return on the box office. Okay. And the most recent study I could find was done in 2020, where the average return on investment for movies today is 3.5-to-1. So The Jazz Singer did double the expected return on what a good movie would make. And my favorite fact is that The Jazz Singer entered the public domain as of January 1st, 2023, this year. So expect to be inundated with a flood of film school adaptations of The Jazz Singer.
I don't know about that. Although I do want to take a tangent on this topic for a second because you made me think of something. This, to me, feels like the greatest no-brainer in the history of adoption of new technologies in the film industry. Like, let's go from silent films to films that are more like real life where we have sound and picture at the same time synchronized. Like, that just it felt inevitable. Why was there ever any resistance when they were on the verge of developing that technology? Why was that considered a risky move in Hollywood to try to make that happen?
Why was it a risky move for Netflix to go to an all-streaming model? Why was it a risky move for Amazon to only sell stuff online? Your brain went to the same place mine did.
So I was thinking, what are some other technological developments we've had in this industry where it felt like a risky move? Like 3D, for example. If you remember about a decade or two ago, there was this big trend of 3D movies, and everybody was wondering if every movie was going to be 3D, and it just didn't catch on. And I don't know if they're even still releasing new movies in 3D. There was big changes in the sound industry. If you remember Dolby and all those things where you would hear lots of noises in the theater to let you know you got the latest sound system. And now it feels like they don't focus on that so much anymore. I remember when they were transitioning from film projectors to digital projectors, and there was all this uncertainty about the purity of the craft and the flexibility that you get and whether or not it was going to happen. And I think it's all but happened, and now only by exception do a few filmmakers release movies that were filmed on actual film stock.
This feels like something that is always in the conversation when you're talking about art and media. It's this one camp is the progressives, like, oh, look at the latest technology that's pushing the boundaries forward and allowing us to do new, cooler, bigger, different things. And then you have the other side, which is the purists. It's like, no, you can't make a movie that's done on 35 millimeter film. How dare you? That's not even a movie anymore. That's just a CGI conglomeration of nonsense. And it seems like it doesn't matter what the argument is. Those people always lose. Like, progress will always overtake the people that want to maintain the purity.
The visionaries versus the purists. I like it.
Yes. Purists, if you're a purist listener in any aspect of your life, just be ready to be bulldozed by a progressive.
Okay, well, speaking of progressives versus purists, I think you brought this up a couple of episodes ago where you mentioned that there was this new way to play Magic the old-fashioned way called Spell Table.
Yes.
So, we were kind of looking for a way to try it out ourselves since we're far apart and can't play Magic together. And we have gone online and played Magic against each other online, but it just doesn't feel the same. So we were trying to find a way to play paper Magic together, but Spell Table feels like it's going to bridge the gap. So I sent you a copy of this Magic the Gathering dual decks that's like a green-black deck versus a red-blue deck. And now you have an exact same copy of the one that I have. We haven't done it yet, but before we record the next episode, I think we will have played together paper Magic online, which feels like this weird
joint venture almost. Yeah, I know what you mean. We're taking two things and slamming them together. It's like chocolate and peanut butter. They shouldn't work, but they're gonna.
Old-fashioned Magic versus new technology. Instead of just playing online, we're going to play with cards, but we're going to use the internet to enhance the experience.
I'll tell you right now, the question for me is not if it's going to work, but based on how well it works, how much money I'm going to invest in my overhead camera and boom mic system to make sure it's like an optimal play space.
I can't even think logistically where I'm going to make this happen, but I'll figure something out.
You got tape. You've got sticks. You can do something.
Tape and sticks. Yeah. All right. So we'll give that a try. Now, Josh, I was looking at, I was just doing like you do occasionally as a podcaster where you kind of take stock of where you're at. And I was looking at, we have a healthy Patreon supporting, and thank you so much if you're one of our Patreon supporters or you ever have been in the past. Really, it means a lot to us. It helps us fund the costs that go with making this happen, and it just makes us feel appreciated. And occasionally you get free content. We just released, so our last episode ran kind of long, and so there was about a 15-minute clip of that episode that didn't make the final cut that I released on Patreon, only to our Patreon subscribers. But I was taking stock of all of our social media feeds, and we're right at some big thresholds for a lot of our things. We're coming up on 100 combined on our Reddit and our YouTube. So if you're interested in joining in our conversation anonymously, you can go follow our subreddit and increase the numbers there. Reddit.com/r/badatmagic. You can go to our YouTube channel. It's a little bit stale. We haven't posted any new content there in a little while, but you can go there and listen to us do some Magic drafts together, or see some of the content that we put up there. But what I want to push right now is our Facebook. So if you haven't followed us on Facebook, now's a chance. You can get us over 100 on Facebook. Here's an idea I got in case you want to join. I have this family meme. It's a fun family meme that my dad started. We call it rock sitting. Here's how it goes. Think planking circa 2010. You just take a loopy photo and then you post it, and it just looks different than anything you've ever seen, but it's much safer than planking. All you have to do is find a rock of sufficient size in an interesting location so that it looks interesting in the background, and then you have to sit on it in a very specific pose. The pose is that you're sitting with your back straight and your arms at your sides with your hands planted on the rock and your feet extended straight out from you and your toes pointed up. It looks downright silly. It's the rock sitting pose. So if you take a photo of yourself sitting on a rock in this pose, label it #rocksitting and put it up on our Facebook page, and we'll start a rock sitting thread and you can join in. Have you ever sent me a rock sitting pose, Josh?
I have not sent you any rock sitting poses. No, sorry, Ben. I'll have to get on that and add to our Facebook page.
Okay, I'll put up a few so people get the idea. Link in the show notes.
So for all you Zoomers, if we have any Zoomers that are listening, Facebook is this old social media platform where elderly people post pictures of their kids and family life to each other. Let's see. Oh, the Patreon episode. Yes, we did cut a segment out of the episode. It's very rare that we first of all, that we cut segments because usually we just leave in everything that we talk about. But this last episode, we deliberately went to a whole lot of extra content because we didn't know what was going to make the final cut. And so we recorded like 50% more episode than we normally do. And I find it funny that the only full segment that got cut was my full segment, where I had something to say and it gets cut. Like, well, that's what happens when you're not the final editor, I suppose. But I'll also push that out on our bonus feed. Like, if you become a patron, you also have access to the other RSS feeds, so you can automatically get those new episodes pushed out to you.
Yeah. I feel like I need to respond to that, what you just said, but I don't know what to say because you're right. It was a story that you told. It's because your content is the premium content, Josh. It's paid only.
Ben, I am so fake offended right now. Like, I can't even talk to you.
Well, Josh, yes, speaking of the things that old people do, yesterday was your birthday. Ooh. Josh, was this the big 4-0?
I am now 40 years old, Ben.
What?
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, I'm old. One of the jokes I came across in the group text was, "Are you signing up for AARP yet?" And my response was no, but my Medicare Part D is going to kick in next week. So that's going to be awesome.
Now, wait a sec. I thought you told me that your wife taught you the fact that there is an age with the federal government by which you are officially old. What was it again?
This age, 40. I am now.
Josh, you are officially old according to the United States government.
I am part of the protected class of old people. So now
if someone discriminated against you in the workplace, you are now officially protected as old.
This is the first time I've been part of a protected class. As an above-average height white guy, I have needed no protections my entire life. But now I'm an old above-average height white guy, and so I need to be protected against all these ageist people out there.
Oh, man, that's awesome. Well, happy birthday, man. Okay, so I didn't do this on purpose, but when I sent you the cards, not knowing how long the mail system would take, I had no idea it would actually arrive at your house on your birthday.
They showed up on my birthday, and that was nice. It was a nice little pleasant walk outside in like a sprinkly, rainy, drizzly Arizona day, which we don't get very often. And I got a box, a happy birthday present from my
Kuwait.
Podcast co-host from across the world.
Okay, well, that same day I went to the post office and I sent you something else, Josh. While I was out here, I bumped into a guy that had a machine that could make vinyl stickers. And I had him pump out several hundred beautiful stickers of our podcast logo. And I sent you a couple dozen of them so that you could have them. I also want to offer them to our patron subscribers. So our Patreon subscribers. So if you're a patron, I'm going to send these out to everyone that's current patrons. Please go in and make sure your address is correct. That'd be awesome. And then I can send you a sticker of the podcast logo. Also, to wrap it up, we've had a few more people recently go on the podcast player of their choice and rate our podcast. Thank you to those that have done it. We've got nothing but 5-star ratings. So this is a 5-star podcast. We've got enough where it's starting to be statistically, like it's not just my mom.
Well, I mean, objectively, I think we are a 5-star podcast, and anybody that gives us less than 5 stars is like, what are you even doing? Why are you listening to non-5-star podcast?
Well, speaking of 5 stars, Josh, I want to tell you a story of a 5-star prank. Did you hear about what happened at West Point this past week?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so at the West Point Military Academy, they were going to do some construction or something, and they were going to move this statue, and at the base of this statue was a time capsule that had been put in sometime in the mid-19th century, like 1850 or something like that.
Oh, wow, okay.
So they had this time capsule there, and they scheduled like a live web streaming video of opening this time capsule that was put in 1850.
Oh, no. Wait. The time capsule made by military academy cadets in the 1800s? Dude, that can be... All I can imagine is like squirrel skeletons coming out of the thing.
Yeah, so they gathered a crowd around. They were all gathered around at the statue on a live stream. They opened the box up, and it was empty.
Empty?
Empty. Everyone was embarrassed. They apologized to everyone that was there, closed it in humiliation, and it hit all the news wires as this giant farce that this almost 200-year-old time capsule from West Point Military Academy was empty.
I love this so much because that just tells you college kids have not changed in hundreds of years. They blew off this assignment until the morning of, and they came back in like, oh crap, we were supposed to come up with something for the time capsule. I've got an idea, guys. Don't worry. Follow my lead. They sealed it up. The teacher comes in and is like, oh, yeah, no, we loaded up with all kinds of legitimate historically relevant memorabilia, but we just sealed it before you came into the class today.
Yeah. So talk about playing the long game. I mean, of course, none of the people that ever touched this thing are even remotely still alive. I mean, these guys have been dead and buried for 100 years. But they open it up and there was just some dust inside. Now, of course, your initial reaction is like, whoa, they sealed up an empty time capsule. But then you start to churn, your mind starts to churn. You think, what are some other possibilities here? Is it possible that someone at some point dug it up and took out whatever was inside and put it back and hid the fact that they'd done that? Is it possible that they put something in there and something happened to it? So there was some dust inside. And they ended the live stream as if it were over. But then somebody was like, now hang on a minute. And they kind of dug around in the bottom of it. And there was some dust. And in the dust was some coins.
Okay.
What they think might have happened is that there may have been some paperwork or some historical documents, and there may have been a leak in the seal, and all of that disintegrated and turned into dust and hid that. Also, somebody is there like, all right, we put in this treatise that shares the secret of the life, the universe of everything, but we need something else to go in there. Anybody got anything else? I got some pocket change. Okay, throw that in there. So there was these silver coins from the mid-19th century that are even though back then it would have been 2 bits, it's estimated is worth about $1,000.
No,
so
I like
it wasn't
mine better.
Completely empty. Yeah,
I like mine better. It was a total prank. And here's my favorite part of this whole thing, okay? I think it was empty. I think it was a prank. And I think, oh, man, whoever opens this, it's going to be so funny when there's nothing in there. Or it's just like our pocket change that we had. And the best part is they never opened it during their lifetime. All these people died, but they were unable to move on to the next life. Their ghosts are lingering, waiting for someone to open the time capsule and get pranked. Like it's their unfinished business.
I'm sure it exceeded their expectations because none of them envisioned a future where this would be more than just a crowd of people standing around. They didn't think that it would be live streaming over the internet.
Oh man, if I pulled a prank like that expecting to get 1 or 2 people and ended up getting like a full live stream for thousands, like that would be so awesome. What a great return on their investment.
Yeah. So there was a time where they thought that's what it was, but there happened to be something in there. Anyway,
I also hang on before you move on. I love your version of this where it's like, oh, we have this treatise that gives us the meaning of life. What else should we put in here? I've got random stuff in my pocket. Those two things don't go together, but that's also a great story.
All right, I want to give you an update on Kuwait. Just what's going on, what's here. So occasionally I'm able to go off base, and I was looking at sites to see, and Kuwait doesn't have like this fantastic storied history, but I was trying to find out a little bit about it. So I found out that they have a National History Museum downtown, and I looked at some photos of it online and it looked great. So I grabbed a friend and we went down there, and it was a big old nothing burger. Like somebody at some time in the past had this aspiration of creating this great National History Museum, built the whole thing, and then looked around and says, all right, what do we put in it? And there wasn't anything to put in it, and it kind of just got dusty and forgotten. So we went in. There was one security guard at the desk who like took my ID and stared at it for way too long and then let us in, and there were 2 exhibits and everything else was closed. There was like 6 buildings on the campus, all closed. We were in one building, 2 exhibits. That was it. Worst museum ever.
Okay, so immediately my brain goes to why is it the worst museum ever? Because, I mean, Kuwait's like in the Persian Gulf, right? Like nestled in the middle. I mean, that was a major trade hub back in the ancient world. That you can't tell me that there aren't historically like valuable things that happened there.
Okay.
Here's my thought. I have 2 immediate ideas of what this is. First of all, the place has been ransacked. Every time they load it up with something valuable, it just all gets stolen. That's my first thought. My second thought is that whatever historical society has quote unquote created this museum is just totally running off with all of the grant money that they're getting to run this place.
Maybe. So the one exhibit had something I'd never heard of before that's really fascinating. At the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates in the Persian Gulf, there's an island called Failaka Island that belongs to the nation of Kuwait. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait back in the 1990s, there was civilization on Failaka Island. You can look it on a map, link in the show notes. I'll put a photo in the photo album. There was an entire community on this island that's it's large-ish, but it's not huge. And it is the oldest continuously inhabited place in the entire region, like dating back like 3,000 years before Christ. There are artifacts and relics and ruins on the island dating back to like the ancient Greeks and Romans. And when Saddam Hussein invaded, he decided he wanted to claim this as a prize, so he pillared it, plundered it, removed all of the inhabitants from the island, and used all the buildings for target practice.
Nice. Very classic Napoleon move.
Yeah. So there was a time where it was utterly uninhabited, and since we, liberated Kuwait, since that time, it's kind of slowly been re-inhabited, but it's not reached its former glory. So there was an exhibit and some artifacts in the museum about that, and I learned about Failaka Island. And if I get the chance, I really, really, really want to go there before I leave.
Re-inhabited. So Saddam Hussein invaded, kicked everybody off the island, but now they're re-inhabiting it after they completely leveled this place. Does that mean people, by their choice, are moving back to this island to rebuild from nothing? Or is this like a government program? Like, hey, go live on this island?
He didn't level it, and it's still a desirable place to live. Okay. Like the structures were still there. The main ones had bullet holes in them.
Yeah, bullet holes that's just a thing. That just adds character to the place.
Right, right. Just
you ever
gives
get
a patina.
Yeah, you get like a scratch in your car. That's not a blemish. That's a story. I got this like in the use of my car.
People buy bullet hole stickers and put them on their car. These are genuine bullet holes.
That's right. Oh, you see these bullet holes? This Saddam Hussein did this back in the 90s, and these are real. These aren't those aftermarket bullet holes that you get from some of the fake realtors down the street.
Yeah. So there's occasionally wildlife we see around the camp. It's fascinating. There's my roommate next door that I share a bathroom with is the wing chief of safety. And apparently animals are a significant enough concern that it consumes a major portion of his time. One, there's birds. Birds are a big deal because birds will fly up in front of airplanes, potentially damage the engines, and could cause a crash. So they have to be aware of their migratory patterns, their nesting locations, their behavioral patterns, and occasionally they do things to control the population. They come up with euphemistic words for it because people tend to not like the fact that they're running around killing animals, so they call it depredation.
Well, no, hang on a second. This is a thing that happens in like every airport around the world. This is a standard program called BASH. This is the Bird Aircraft Strike Hazard Program, and every airport has an awesome different way of dealing with their birds.
Right, so, and they like to make it think like they just go gently to their nesting locations and move them to another location. But a lot of times they're just shooting them.
I've seen some airports that have remote control planes that buzz all of the swampland right around the airport to get the birds to scare
the birds away.
I've seen ones that have trucks that drive around with giant foghorns on the back that are constantly blowing to scare all the birds away. I have also seen ones where they have just every couple of weeks, they just open it up for hunting. Like, oh yeah, we're not going to fly to the airport today, but we need you hunters to like basically fod walk through this swamp and kill every bird you see.
Yeah. So that's part of the thing they do. They have there was a guy here that used to walk around with a USDA shirt on, United States Department of Agriculture. I was like, why do we have a USDA guy here? Yeah, he's the bird guy. So that's one part of it. Another part that the local wildlife can be a problem is that there are lots of feral cats and dogs, and if they get rabies, they could be a threat to the humans on base because there's no known cure to rabies, and if you get it, the survival rate is 0. Did you know that?
Times.
I did not know that.
I knew that about rabies because when I deployed in 2007, they had a vet give us a briefing, and we were all blown away that, one, the military has vets, and two, that they deployed one, and it's a mission-critical position. Not only did he give all the briefings about the rabies and the animal-borne diseases that you can get, but he's also the guy that would go around to all the bases and check the local food to make sure it was actual edible food.
Yeah.
Fun fact, that guy shut down our restaurant at our base that I had eaten at 3 times up to that point. Turns out it was dog.
Was it good?
I thought it was delicious.
They're the only government department that's allowed to do that. So yeah, that's the other reason he's here. Okay, so there's packs of feral dogs that I don't think they have rabies, but they try to relocate them, but sometimes they just kill them. Again, depredate them. There's also wild cats. So one night I was running around. Oh, and of course, there's all the species that tend to follow humans around. There's cockroaches and rats and all the buildings. Ugh.
All the fun rodents, yeah.
Yeah, I see giant rats all the time. Blech. Anyway, so one night I was running it's about a half-mile circuit around my dorm just to get some laps in and get some distance. And the first lap I went around, there was a cat up on top of the dumpster, and it made eye contact with me as I went by. And then I came by again, and it was there the next time, and it had gotten a little bit closer. And I went around, 4, 5, 6 times, and every time the cat was there, it would make eye contact with me. Now, Josh, bear with me for a moment as I try to go into the mind of this feral desert kitty, because it felt like we were having a conversation. I thought of this cat like a streetwalker, and it was looking at me. This cat had heard what it was like to be a house cat, and when it saw me and thought, hey, I could be your house cat.
That is the exact opposite conversation that I would have had with that cat in my mind. In my mind, the cat getting closer every time I made a lap. I'm thinking the cat's like, you know what? There's like almost no chance I take this guy down, but if I do.
This is not a big cat. This is just a house cat. But man, it was making eyes at me like I could sit on your lap and purr all night. I heard what those house cats are like. They live in air conditioning. You scoop up their poop and take it out for them. There's always food in their bowl, water in their bowl.
So do you have a cat, Ben?
That is illegal and could get me in Article 15. So, of course.
Now, I found this loophole. It is illegal to get a pet, but the vet is still there, and you can bring your pets into the vet, and they're not supposed to ask you where you got the thing. Like, you can still bring them animals for treatment. It's like, I plead the fifth. This is an animal I found that needs your assistance.
That's a good microcosm of some of the kind of problems we have in government sometimes, because we want to make certain things illegal, but we also want people to not be so ashamed if they need help to not ask for it when they need it.
Yeah. But at the same time, like, you're not supposed to have pets, so why are you going to the vet? That's when I was deployed, the only time I ever drew my weapon with the intention of firing it was at a stray dog.
Yeah, well, it's a serious threat, man. You get rabies, you could die.
It was the middle of the night. I had gone to the bathroom, and I was walking back, and right in the middle of the road that I had to walk down was a dog. And I drew my 9mm gun, flipped the safety off, aimed at him, and I'm like, let's go, Cujo. You or me. And then we just did the thing. Away? No, we did the thing where we kind of sidled, like I was sidestepping and he sidestepped the other way, and we did like a 180-degree turn, and then I slowly backed off until he turned and took off.
Okay.
So he knew I was ready.
The other kind of wildlife I've seen is the like native wildlife that isn't just the effect of poor management by humans. There was a desert fox just last night, came, 5 steps from me, and it just was minding its own business. It's like, hey, I was here first, buddy.
You seen any camel spiders yet?
No, I've seen actual camels, though. Those are just wild running around here. That's craziest thing I've ever seen. We got off the freeway last week, and there was one just standing by the exit, 10 steps away. Photo on my Facebook.
I saw a camel. That's funny. That's like if the Kuwaitis were deployed to America and like took a picture of a horse. I saw a horse.
Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned, I was running a lot. As I tend to do when I'm deployed, I run a lot more when I'm deployed when I do. But the local force support squadrons decided they're going to do something interesting. And that is, in September is the usual Air Force Marathon. And usually in deployed locations, they'll run an iteration of that, kind of in cooperation with the one. But because of the hot climate and the fact that it's still well out of safe range for running right now, what they've decided they're going to do also to expand participation is they're going to allow you to run a marathon's worth of distance in the month of September and get credit for having participated.
So
I saw you roll your eyes. Go ahead.
I've only ever run one marathon, and I don't want to run another marathon ever.
Same.
But at the same time, like, I ran the whole thing. Like, it was start to finish one day. Like, I ran the 26 miles. I feel like that's a little bit different of an accomplishment than, I clocked 9 miles a week for the whole month. Like, those two things are not equivalent.
I get it. It's like other people did the Air Force Marathon. All I got was this lousy T-shirt kind of approach. But I'm kind of taking a middle of the road thing. I want to do this, but I want to do it as fast as possible. So since yesterday was September 1st, last night was the first night of it. After I got off work, I went and did a 10K. So I've got 6.2 miles down. I've got 20 miles to go. So.
When you get your participation like medal or T-shirt or something, is it going to be asterisks, or are they going to mark down your time? Like, oh, Ben Rich ran the Air Force Marathon in 26 days and 4 hours.
Well, I'm going to try to do it in a week. So that's my goal. Starting yesterday. Yeah,
Good
thanks.
luck to you.
I'll do another 6 tonight. I found out, my commander sat down with me and she says, hey, we're transitioning in the way that we do deployments of forces, and I found out that you're not getting a replacement, which is kind of a problem. Usually that's one of the main things in a deployment. You find out you're getting a replacement, they come, you train them to do your job in a couple of days, and then you leave knowing that your responsibility is taken care of.
You are so bad at your job that they decided, like the Air Force decided that, you know what, we actually don't need this whole position. Like, he's so bad, I don't even want to risk it having somebody else.
Or my job is so unnecessary that they realize they don't even need it anymore.
I take the requirements from the customers and give it to the engineers.
Because of that, I was only supposed to be here for 4.5 months, and she sat me down and said, look, I don't want to disrupt your family, your life, or anything like that, but if you're willing to stay, I'd like you to stay for the full 6 months.
What? Excuse me? That's not a thing. Can she do that?
She just asked me if I wanted to.
Okay, well, hang on, because your 4 months was supposed to end, what, late September, early October, right?
Yeah, early October.
Okay, but then you were gonna like separate from the Air Force in what, like the early next year, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, give me a month here, because I'm trying to draw up the timetables.
So I told her I would stay until December, so I'll be here until the 1st of December.
Ben! What's the matter with you? Like, what? You are going through one of the most incredible changes in your entire life. Your entire adult professional life has been spent in military service, and now you have to transition to a completely different existence in this universe, something you've never experienced before, and all you did was take 60 days off of how much time you have to prepare for that.
Yeah. So that's another challenge I've taken on in my life.
A challenge. Yeah. Okay. Uh-huh.
In other news, I've lost 35 pounds from the time I left home.
Listen to him. Listen, listeners, you hear this? You hear Ben running away from this topic as quickly as possible? Like the tone in his voice and the words that he's choosing, he does not want to engage me on this at all.
I think I can do it anyway, Josh. I did, and I like this. I like this job. I like what I'm doing here. I like this part of Air Force life.
That's the thing. You're comfortable now, and you want to stay.
I'm hanging on too long, Josh.
You want to stay in your comfort zone for as long as possible, Ben. I'm telling you right now, the unknown unknowns of civilian life are going to hit you like a ton of bricks. And I don't mean like a metaphorical cartoon ton of bricks. I mean an actual ton of bricks. Like, you're going to have so much physical weight that you're going to have to move and carry in order to make things work.
So I've started testing my toe in the civilian employment market already. In fact, I reached out to this certified public accountant I know that might be considering opening his own firm, and he was like, "No, man, I couldn't hire you."
I have it on good authority. That guy laughed openly when he received that text message.
There's one other thing I want to talk about from being out here in Kuwait. That is, the second largest coalition partner on this base is the Italians. They have several hundred people here. We work with them very closely. I see them several times a week. And it's weird. I have probably more regular interaction with Italian professionals here in Kuwait than I did when I was on an Italian Air Force base in Italy.
Huh. Isn't that weird how that works?
Yeah. Now, there was an interesting thing that would happen when we lived on that Italian Air Force base and we kind of relied on them for things, and that was... It was really frustrating to kind of get anything done because the things that were important to us were not the things that were important to them. And so I found that there was about a 6-to-1 multiplier of expectations versus reality. And what I mean is, anytime I tried to do anything that involved interaction with the Italians, whatever my expectation was, I needed to multiply it by 6. It just
in order to get what you wanted, like as a negotiation tactic, you mean?
It was like pi. It was like a constant number that no matter what, that's how long it was going to take. If I said, hey, I need to do this thing, it's going to take me an hour, but it involves the Italians, it's going to take 6 hours. If I need to do a thing that was going to take a day, but it involved the Italians, it was going to take 6 days. 1 week, 6 weeks. 1 month, 6 months. 1 year, 6 years. Didn't matter, no matter what. If it involved the Italians, multiply by 6.
Apologies to all our Italian listeners. Jeez, Ben.
So, you know this about me, but I want to state it explicitly for our listeners. I have a personal ethic of breaking the chain, in that I don't look at experiences I've had in the past, hazing type experiences, as something that I now have an obligation to pass on. So now we're in this weird role reversal where the Italians are on this base, and even though it belongs to the Kuwaitis, the Americans are really the ones that they own all the support services, the security, the base access, the dining facilities, all of the physical resources, the transportation, the airfield management, all those things belong to the Americans, and the Italians rely on us for all of that, just like we did in reverse when I lived in Italy.
Okay. So then now the Italians engage you for stuff, and you have the opportunity to extend out the time for no other reason than because it did it to you.
I could stick it to the man and be like, hey, suck it, Italians. But of course I don't. So this is my chance to break the hazing chain. So every chance I get, I'm trying to do things to help the Italians.
I love that you took, like, what's this, breaking the chain? Like, I'm taking it upon myself to be the better person and elevate the experience for everyone. No, Ben, what you're doing is not taking petty revenge on dudes that had nothing to do with the problems that you experienced years ago and thousands of miles away.
Josh, like, that's what you're describing, but you did it too at the academy. Like, the upperclassmen haze you, and then when the new lowerclassmen come in, you haze them. And it's not because those lowerclassmen hazed you and you're getting revenge. It's just the hazing mentality.
Well, I did haze, but Ben, that's established on this podcast that I am a small, petty person. And so, of course, I'm going to exact petty revenge at every opportunity. Like, we're not talking about me. We're talking about you. Yeah, if you want to use your what about you-ism to deflect the conversation to me. No. We all agree. Everybody that's listening to my voice knows I'm the bad guy out of our dynamic duo here. We're talking about you. You don't get brownie points for not exacting revenge. This is like, oh, I didn't insult this person. I should get good brownie points for that. No, you don't get points for things you don't do.
So what the Italians did this last week is apparently there's a Catholic bishop that's over all of the church in this region, and he was coming here to their base. And of course, like they do, they waited till the last minute to try to get him a security pass to come on the base. So I helped facilitate this visit of this Catholic bishop to come to the base, and then they got me a pass to go to the mass that he was holding down in their chapel in the Italian camp, and then I got to go to dinner with this bishop. And this was a fascinating experience. I'll post a photo in the show notes, but to sit there, first of all, I never sat through an entire Catholic mass in Italian like that, and then second of all, the dinner was awesome. It was a really great experience, and yeah, my Italian has doubled since I've been here, Josh. I go to class every week, and I study on Duolingo, and I'm spending time speaking to Italians, and it's great. I can't wait to go back to Italy.
Did you take communion?
No, a bunch of people did. I was not one of them. But that's for religious reasons.
Well, I get that, but did you go up and do the thing? Like, there's a common hand signal that they do. Did you do that?
I don't know it. Even if I decided I wanted to do something that to me is borderline sacrilegious, to fake that I'm part of their religion when I'm not, I'd be afraid I'd get it wrong and they would see me as an imposter.
In most places I've been to, obviously this is an Italian bishop who knows what his deal is, but in most masses that I have seen, if you go up to the altar in the communion line and you just cross your arms across your chest, that's the signal for them that, oh, I actually don't take communion, and they just do like a little Catholic blessing on you and you go about your way. You don't have to actually imbibe the body or blood of Christ.
Nice. Yeah, I would immediately been sniffed out as an imposter.
They would have fed you like one of those wafers and it would have burned. It would have poisoned your LDS system.
Yeah. My ethic of not hazing goes much farther than just not hazing. It's also just this general life ethic of trying to be helpful. You know, I pick up litter everywhere I go. I remember watching my dad and my mom's father, everywhere they go, they like pull weeds out of other people's flower beds, which seems ludicrous, but it's just this general ethic of being helpful. So tomorrow I've got a work crew set up, and we're going to, I got some tools, and we're going to go shovel gravel off the sidewalks by the morale tent.
If I caught people pulling weeds out of my yard, I would be so unnaturally irate at them. Like, just the audacity. How dare you be so passive-aggressive about how ugly you think my lawn is that you're just going to come and take care of it for us and then feel self-righteous about it. Oh, we did a nice thing by making this eyesore tolerable for the rest of the neighborhood. Like, how dare you, sir? I can pull my own weeds. I choose not to. I want to live in squalor. That's my choice. Get off of my property.
That blows my mind at the voice that you give the other person when imagining yourself as the one doing that. Because that isn't at all the voice that's happening in my head when I'm picking up,
but you need to be aware of both perspectives, Ben. Like,
I'm not who can live in this filth? Why does the person that should be the one to clean up this building leave all this garbage outside? I'm just like, I'm tired of looking at this garbage. I'll pick it up and then I don't got to see it anymore.
There's a difference between, like, if there's a house, like, a little old lady lives in there and you're friends with her and the yard is completely overgrown, like a jungle, 3 and 4 foot high grass, and you go and you take care of all of the landscaping. That's one thing. That's you doing a nice thing, and it's really hard to spin it any other way. If this guy has, like, a decent yard that's maintained, but there's just some weeds popping up in places that he hasn't gotten around to yet, that's just you doing chores, to spite him? Like, why? Like, that, I don't know. There's a difference in kind there. I'm not sure where the line is, but there's one of those is a good act, and the other one is, like, almost, it feels like petty revenge from my perspective. Like, dude, can you really not tolerate my 3 dandelions in my rose bushes? Seriously, get off of my lawn.
All right, listeners, I'm interested to know what you think. Do you think that pulling weeds in someone else's yard is passive-aggressive and rude, or is it just being neighborly?
With or without permission? This is important. Like, because if it's without permission, there's no argument you can make that it's, this is a good act. If you didn't ask me, then you should not be in my yard.
All right, interested to hear what you have to say. Josh, I got a bad bit of technology for you.
Cool.
I have had some people I've interacted with in my life that carry over, I think, an ethic from the past that they haven't really considered how it overlays. The world is transformed under our feet, and we haven't thought of a new way to think about this. And the new thing is data services that are generally given to us for free. Now, you and I, as both having been in the tech sector, understand what's happening behind the scenes in order to provide a data service to someone. To some people, it's magic. And I don't know who it was that said it, but I'll attribute to Isaac Asimov, once said, any sufficiently developed technology is indistinguishable from magic. I don't know. Someone said that. You can find out who.
Very common thing, yeah.
It's like that. Like the fact that you can log on to any electronic device anywhere on Earth and see, let's say, for instance, a online cloud storage backup of your personal photos. It's magic. You don't think about how that actually works. You and I know how that works. We know that there's a server that stores the data and has striping and backups, and it's on redundant hard drives, and it's multiplied across multiple locations and cached. And then when you connect, it validates your identity and passes you the data, and all this happens virtually transparently in no time at all. And it's like as if all that data is just always at your fingertips anywhere on Earth.
I'm already gearing up all of my cynical business conspiracy theory stuff. So I need to know where you're taking this before I launch into it.
Try to resist if you can. I want you to be with me here.
Okay. Now, I agree with everything you're saying so far.
There's business models that go along with these things, and in some respect, all the cynical things you were probably thinking about, the fact that they use it against us or are eventually trying to charge us for it or use our data and sell it to people or whatever it is, that it's not free. It's not free to have a giant server farm full of servers that are generating heat and consuming electricity and using data services that are expensive. That's not free. But we consume a lot of those services, and while our new economy is in the process of transforming to new ways. The old way of consuming information might have been paying 50 cents for a newspaper or paying someone to, hold something for you, those kinds of things. And we've transitioned to this where it's ubiquitous, available anywhere, and virtually at no cost whatsoever. There still needs to be a money flow. And occasionally some of these providers will come to you and say, hey, we'd like you to start paying for this. What is your reaction when you get a paywall or a pop-up or a request or an email or a little blurb at the bottom of the page that asks you to pay? What's generally your reaction?
So that's very dependent on the service that I'm trying to access. Google does this thing where on a blank page, it'll just give me a news feed and just give me it just cherry picks stuff that the algorithm knows that I want to read from across the internet. And occasionally I'll click into the article to get more information. And every time I click into a newspaper website or like a news media site that has then a paywall, it's like, oh, here's the first paragraph to continue reading. It's like a 99-cent a month subscription. Not only do I close that tab, I tell Google I never want to see anything from this site ever again.
So you close it with prejudice.
Like, yes, for news stuff.
So I want you to dwell on that emotion for a second. Think, why do I feel that way? Why am I angry when someone asks for me to pay for a service they're providing?
Because there are so many other services, there's so many other places I can get that same information for free. So why would you charge me 99 cents for it?
So let's go all the way through to the how they get paid for it then. The places that give it to you for free are getting their money some other way, by banner ads on the site or by monetizing your collection of your personal data.
I have pop-up blockers and ad blockers installed on all of my browsers. So whenever I go to sites, it blocks all the banner ads. If that site has one of those banner ad blocking detection modules where it comes up like, oh, in order to access this site, you need to disable your ad blocker. I saw a great comic about this because a guy leaned into his computer and was like, it sounds like you're asking me to leave your website. Is that what you're asking me to do? And
so I knew this about you.
Okay.
If everyone was like you, it would defeat this. You're in this arms race with this new economic paradigm, Josh, of trying to give you stuff for free in a way that's still economically viable for them.
It's not free.
If you were the only one doing that, you can totally get away with it forever, indefinitely. But if everyone did what you're doing, it would defeat it instantly, and we'd have to come up with a new model. What model would you propose?
Man, you're just like all about these corporate overlords. Yes, please chain me to the wagon. I will pull the King of Persia all over.
Let's agree on a fundamental assumption here. Stuff costs money. Like running a newspaper that does investigative journalism costs money. Who's going to pay for it?
Okay, like I can. This is the difference, because philosophically, logically, ideologically, I can agree with everything that you're saying. This is a business. It is providing a service. Ostensibly, you want that service. They should be compensated for it, and you should be part of the compensation package. On the practical side, we're still in this weird Wild West transition where if there is a news site with an article that I want to read, 9 times out of 10, I can find like almost that exact same article verbatim, because it was probably written by AI anyway, on a different website.
Yes. I agree with you. Here's the problem, is because the internet has increased our reach to all boundaries of the earth, sometimes I will try to read an article and it'll be like the Cincinnati, Ohio Times or whatever, and I hit a paywall and I'm like, why would I subscribe to the Cincinnati, Ohio Times? Like, there's no reason I would want that, so I'm not going to read this article. However, I heard someone on a podcast I listened to once say, you know what, if we want this kind of thing, we should be willing to participate in it. So I've made a principled stand where I've decided to pay for a few select places where there's information I try to get. The New York Times, I subscribe to New York Times and pay for a subscription there. And I've enjoyed being able to have just unimpeded access to the information on that site. I feel like it's global enough, its reach is wide enough, it's journalism pure enough, its views ideologically sound enough that I am comfortable paying for that, and I found that to be valuable. Also, Wikipedia. About once a year, I'll make a contribution to Wikipedia because I use it virtually nonstop, and I enjoy that service, and I feel like I can make a contribution and show that I appreciate that. I've also kind of given up on my idea that I feel entitled to free email and online data storage, and I pay a small subscription fee for those, and it just makes me feel less need to feel victimized by data monetization, and like I'm paying for a service that I think is valuable and useful and I want to have continued access to, so I pay for it.
Interesting. Did you start paying for those services because you exceeded the free limit of storage that they were giving you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And listeners, he nodded at me. Like so what you're saying is you didn't have a choice. You used it for free right up until the very moment that they wouldn't let you anymore, and then you started paying.
Yeah, but I didn't do it begrudgingly. I was like, oh, no, I can't believe it. What can I do to get below the limit? I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess I was using this a lot. I should pay for it.
For our Our video and our picture storage, we actually have on physical media. We have solid state drives, external solid state drives that we back all that stuff up onto. I need a more robust solution, and I know that, but I'm just not willing to put in the time and effort right now. I'm going to build a NAS at some point. Like, that's just got to be a thing with the amount of stuff that we generate. But this is transitioning to something different. Like, there's the news stuff, and then there is actual services that I find valuable. Listeners know that I subscribe to YouTube Premium, and that's because I watch so much YouTube that I couldn't stand watching the pop-up ads anymore. I watch enough long-form YouTube that like they would have mid-roll ads, and I just couldn't handle it. Also, it fills 2 roles because Google also then sucks me into using YouTube Music as my premium music subscription, which allowed me to cancel the Spotify subscription I had up to that point. I still think Spotify is the better service, but I'm not going to pay for 2 music services simultaneously. That's ridiculous. Email. I actually pay for email, my own email. I have an email address that is hosted on a server with a domain that I own. So that's...
So you made a distinguishing characteristic between data storage services and journalism services, but I think they're the same thing in that I'm not paying the original producer for it. I'm paying an intermediary who disintermediates. They take the data, get it to me so that I can see it and give me access to it. So if, let's say I paid a subscription fee to Google News and they were getting their news from all kinds of news sources, and instead of those news sources trying to get me to get a subscription to their newspaper, instead just got a small kickback from Google, and then I paid Google a subscription fee, and then I could have unlimited access to all news sites, that would solve the problem.
It would depend on which sites were a part of this weird cable TV conglomeration of news that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I feel like if you really wanted news, you could just pay the Associated Press, right? I think that's like the source that most news sources use for their news.
It kind of is. We've talked about this graph of neutrality related to news, and the AP's right in the center. But sometimes you want a little bit of a biased perspective in what you're consuming, or you want to see one side or the other. And I like just being able to get all the perspectives. I don't want to be constrained to just what's considered to be the purest, most neutral form of anything. I want to see what's out there.
I'm pretty biased in my news consumption. Like, while I'm working throughout the day, there is another computer that sits 3 feet from me, and I will very often turn that on to CNN and just have it running all day. So I'm kind of paying for that because they run the most ridiculous, stupid commercials all day. And it's clear what their target audience is, people that can't sleep right and people that are old and need money. And so you should sell off your life insurance. You should do a reverse mortgage. You should sell off your annuities. It's unbelievable.
Okay, if you could have that same television on to CNN and you could pay and it would just be straight news without any ads and you could just pay a small fee, would you be willing to do that?
Not for CNN. They're way too biased. If I could get like BBC America, if BBC America,
you want them to get your money, but you only give it in the form of attention.
I value their service, but I don't value that specific service enough to pay for it. Another service, maybe, if I was able to sample it long enough, I might pay them a streaming subscription and have it without ads. I might do that.
Because just like you described with YouTube, there was the point where I realized I like the service of YouTube, which is just Google provided data service where people are providing content for free and Google's making that content available all over the world, instant streaming and high definition. And I'm paying Google with my attention to disintermediate that. But I can pay Google a subscription and then they'll let me view all of the content without having to view the ads.
I think the difference there is YouTube. Every time I go to YouTube, I'm guaranteed to get content that I want. I know what I'm getting because I'm the one that's actively searching for it. If I'm paying for a news service and it's just a slow news week, then I might not be getting what I want. Like I said, I commonly turn on CNN, but like late last week, they would not shut up about the hurricane that was going to hit Florida, which admittedly was more interesting than a lot of the other things that were going on that week. But like, I'm not going to, I would have felt gypped if I was paying you for a subscription and all you're talking about all day is a hurricane that has no chance of impacting me or my family. Like, why am I paying you this?
Yeah. I bet that's dominating the news cycle right now. Okay, well, here's all I'm saying, listeners. If you came from the old school of thinking and the world's been transforming under your feet and haven't given it another thought recently, give the idea of paying a subscription fee for information services that you love and appreciate another chance. Maybe consider paying for something now and doing it appreciatively rather than begrudgingly.
Let me give the negative side of this, shall we? With
Sure.
the whole, this just ties into the software as a service. This is the new model, the information services. We're not selling you software, we're selling you services, which means you're part of a service contract, which means the terms and conditions of that contract can change without notice. So a lot of users that people subscribe to HBO Max were very upset a couple of weeks ago when they pulled down a ton of their content. Like all these HBO shows that exist and are in their back catalog. Westworld is the most egregious one that everybody's yelling about. They pulled all of it down from their streaming service. And so now the only way that you can watch that show is if you happen to have bought it on DVD or Blu-ray when it was available for sale.
Do you know why they did that?
Because of the writer's strike. Because they don't want to pay the residual income.
So they didn't put
it
behind a paywall. They took it away completely. It's not available at all.
So this is kind of like what I talked about so many episodes ago with the music service, where I used to buy music and I owned it. It is mine.
You don't possess it. Yeah.
But we don't buy things anymore. We buy access to the service, and the service can be taken away from you at a moment's notice.
I call this hashtag a boring dystopia. This is what real dystopia looks like.
This is what real dystopia looks like, and the problem is it's creeping. And I've said this before. This is conspiracy theory, Josh, right? Tesla is charging a premium subscription for its for features that are already built into their cars. Heated seats is a subscription service for Tesla cars. If that creeps to the rest of the automotive industry, Ben, we are all doomed. You won't own anything. You won't even own the heat generated by the seats in your car anymore. You'll have to pay rent to whoever your auto manufacturer is to have a warm butt in the winter.
I agree that that's a problem. I'd like to make one last plea, and that is you can allow them to continue to monetize your personal data and your attention and think that you're getting something for free when actually you're just paying for it that way, or you can deliberately choose to pay a subscription fee for something and get it without those negative side effects. Give it another chance. If you have this knee-jerk resistance to paying subscription fees for things, maybe give it a chance.
Hang on a second. Are you suggesting that these data services that exist stop mining your information once you start paying them?
I believe in the macroeconomic force of incentives, and I believe there's less incentive for them to do that. No, of course they still
do.
But I'm talking specifically about ones like for instance, the New York Times. When they're not mining my data either way. They're just not letting me have access to their content unless I pay the subscription. Wikipedia, on the other hand, they're not mining my data. They were just providing a service I like for free, and I helped fund it.
Okay, you weren't specifying. I thought you were talking about Gmail or YouTube or all the Google stuff.
No.
When you're still storing your information on there just because you're paying them.
YouTube's a good example because the algorithm's still kind of exploiting my attention, but I'm not watching any ads.
No, but it's still collecting as much information that it can for you, Ben Rich's profile, for all the other targeted advertising that they do.
But I'm not having to endure this constant consumption of my attention on things like advertisements.
Yeah, this is just an episode.
It's why I stopped watching broadcast television a decade and a half ago and haven't ever gone back.
Yeah, like I said, I watch CNN sometimes during the day, and even with only 5% of my attention, it's intolerable.
Okay, I want to tell you a story, Josh. I've kind of been holding off on this one for a long time because I haven't been clear about what to say about it. I'm going to call it bad at brothering.
Okay.
So I'm the oldest of 6 kids. As my mom continued having children, and her labor and childbirth was kind of easy and got faster and faster so that they just reached the point where they were having the children at home. And when I was 7 years old, my youngest sister was born. Her name is Emmeline. This was December of 1984, and I remember I was asleep in my bed. Probably it was 8 or 9 p.m. at night. My dad came down and woke me up and says, "Hey, come on upstairs. Your new sister's here." And I was like, awesome. And we went in, and my mom was sitting there holding the beautiful pink little baby. And he said, "Come here." He said, "Come here and see this." And he brought me in the bathroom, and there was this gross blob of what looked like guts and organs. I'm like, "What is that?" And he's like, "That's the placenta."
I'm aghast that the first thing he did was not call for medical professionals or start transporting your mother to a medical facility and said, "Oh, let me get the other kids and parade them through."
This was their fifth child, and they both grew up on a farm. Josh, you're using the wrong context to evaluate this. His mother was a nurse.
This is not a sterile environment. You can't bring disgusting children in to see somebody that's immunocompromised. Anyway, good Lord, man.
So my sister was born and looked to be just another normal child in the rich family. However, within the first week of her life, her health started to deteriorate immediately and severely. I have to give a caveat here, and that is I'm just recalling all these things from the mind of a very young child. There's going to be some imperfections in my knowledge here to anyone that actually knows and is listening to this. But within about 2 weeks of her being born, her health deteriorated so severely that she looked like she might die. They took her to a hospital where we lived in Idaho Falls, and at one point I think she crashed and was on life support, and they were so unable to help her that they had to put her on a helicopter and fly her several hundred miles to the Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Yeesh.
And I just remember my life being very chaotic at this time. My dad had just gotten a job. We'd settled down in a house in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and it looked like we were going to live there for the rest of our life. And then all of a sudden, me and my other 3 sisters were uprooted, taken to my grandmother's house. My mom and dad were gone. The new baby was gone, and we had no idea what was going to happen. It turns out that she was born with a disease called cystic fibrosis. Do you know about cystic fibrosis?
Very, very basic things. So treat me as if I know nothing.
Okay. So cystic fibrosis is a genetic inherited condition, which means it's just in every cell of your body. And basically what it is when you have a mother and a father that are both carriers of this gene, when the child inherits both recessive genes, then they manifest the symptoms of the disease, which means neither of my parents had any symptoms, but they were both carriers. So my sister got both recessive genes and now has this disease. It's basically at the most fundamental level a defect in your cellular membranes that causes them to be ineffective at transporting chlorine ions. And that screws up your body in so many weird ways. It makes your skin so that it doesn't transport salt effectively with it causes you to be salty and need to consume extra salt, or you'll have problems with your cooling system and dehydration. It causes if you're a male, it causes your reproductive system to be a bit defective so that you're generally sterile. But the most severe symptoms it has is it causes your lungs to not transport water effectively, and you gain thick, sticky mucus. You're highly susceptible to respiratory disease, and you tend to get like scarring. Most cystic fibrosis patients tend to die early in life of respiratory failure, just cumulative damage in your lungs from this defect at the cellular level. And the other defect is it causes the duct in your pancreas that transports digestive proteins into your digestive system to clog up and fail. And so generally new people with cystic fibrosis in the past would die of starvation early in their life. We determined scientifically how to synthesize these proteins, and you can take them orally and these enzymes and take them orally, and you can basically overcome that problem. So once they determined that my sister had cystic fibrosis and started giving her these enzymes orally, then she was able to overcome the fact that she was slowly starving to death from not being able to get nourishment out of her food.
Oh, poor kid.
And then she takes on a life of barely getting by with the food that you're eating to then kind of having this constant struggle with respiratory illness. Every cold, every flu has the potential to turn into like pneumonia and kill you. So once they figured out what her condition was and what the problems were, they brought her back home, and my parents are like, your sister's very special. We're going to love her and we're going to take care of her, but she has a disease called CF. It's going to impact her very severely, and most people with the disease die before they turn 20 years old. So we'll love her as long as we have her in her life. She'll be with us and we'll always cherish her, but she's going to be special and we might not have her forever.
That's a tough conversation to have to synthesize with your children.
It really is.
How do we tell a little kid that there's a complex medical issue that's going to impact this person for the rest of their life, and that they need to treat her differently and also be prepared for sudden catastrophic loss?
You grokked that so perfectly, Josh. You're thinking it now as a parent. As a kid, I was just like, my sister was sick and my parents told me what was wrong, and I just tried to understand it and absorb it. And There was something about being a 7-year-old with a little tiny baby sister that my parents told me was going to die by I was 20 that just sunk deep into my soul. Like, I just learned that, and it was stuck in my mind and my heart, and I was like, this is my sister. I love her. I got to protect her, but she's not going to be with us forever.
This is the moment that you started honing that brotherly sword, that protective instinct that you get as the oldest child.
Yeah, so we always just took care of her and loved her, and sometimes she would get really sick and be kind of frail. There were things we could do to help, like we could give her percussive treatments on her lungs that would help loosen up the sticky mucus in her lungs, and then she would be able to cough it up. She had a nebulizer she would wear over her face that would give her vaporized medication that would help loosen up the mucus in her lungs, and she would breathe it, and we would all just laugh and spend time with her. She had to eat lots of high-calorie foods, so we always kept those stocked up in the house to help her gain weight so that she wouldn't just be skinny and terrible.
How come I get 3 fish sticks when she gets like an entire chicken pot pie?
Yeah, right. No one in our family ever resented her having the best foods or the most foods or the impacts that it had on her life. We just loved her and adored her. And she was a treasure, Josh. She was just a blessing to our family. She just had this personality, this ebullient personality of just zeal for life. Just laughs at everything and enjoys things. And she's just the greatest.
Well, yeah, she got the best meals and everybody treated her like she was special.
But this had such a profound effect on me. So as I grew up and started to get a little older and smarter, I learned about cystic fibrosis and why it happened and what it means and stuff. And at almost the same rate as she was getting older, the medical community was learning more about how to treat and alleviate the symptoms of cystic fibrosis, almost in equal pace with her lifespan. So
it's almost like time worked the same for both the industry and the person.
Yeah, because up to that point, no one with cystic fibrosis had ever lived past the age of like 20.
Well, I mean, we're talking about 1984. This is the dark ages of medicine. I think they were still using leeches in hospitals at that point.
Yeah, but as a kid, I just learned this fact that I thought was immutable, and that is, your sister's a ticking time bomb. She's going to die when she turns 20.
Did you go around like telling all the other kids that? Like, hey, don't mess with my sister. She's going to die.
Yeah, well, no, because you learn not to say that, but it's still in there. You're like, well, my sister's going to die. This was a huge, huge inflection point for my family, Josh. We were on one track, and this was like when Biff showed up with the Gray's Sports Almanac. Like, we just skewed off into a whole other alternate timeline.
The worst sports almanac. Ugh.
Yeah, so our family was going to live and retire in Southeast Idaho, never leave. And then all of a sudden, my dad had a baby with a pre-existing medical condition that wasn't covered by virtually any medical plan out there. There was one, however.
How can you and I ever argue about socialized medicine when you saw firsthand the impact that the medical industry can have on a family that's not prepared for something like this?
Can I please beg your grace in not skewing off on that timeline? I just wanted to make a nod towards it.
Nod towards it and know that I'm going to draw that like a flaming sword and stab you to death with it one day.
So my dad said, well, where could I get a job that will cover a pre-existing condition? And that was with the United States military. So as a person with the college degree that was, he was like 27 or 28 at the time, maybe 30 at the time, went and enlisted at OTS and went to officer training school to be in the Air Force in 1984.
That's awesome that he actually got into OTS. Listeners, like, that's difficult to do.
Yeah, so now all of a sudden my family's living out our lives in Southeast Idaho skewed off on this crazy alternate timeline. The birth of my sister was this precipitating event that causes complete alternative universe. So he joins the Air Force. We moved to Oklahoma and then Alaska, and then he gets out of the Air Force, and our whole life's different. I probably met my wife because of these circumstances. So you can
not probably, absolutely. Like, you would be a potato farmer in Idaho right now if it wasn't for this.
So you can draw a direct line between me meeting Alicia and getting married to Alicia to my sister being born in 1984. It just changed my destiny.
These are great. Like, it's cool. Like, that's a terrible circumstance. Don't get me wrong, and I'm sorry for all of that's happening. But it's awesome to be able to identify these kinds of points in your life. And it's only ever in retrospect you realize, man, my life took a 90-degree turn because of this thing that seemed innocuous at the time.
Yeah. Now, the way that cystic fibrosis works in your cells, a lot of the research that's been done related to genetics has started to help in that they've been able to engineer things like cold viruses that they can turn into benign viruses that can infect your cells and change your DNA to act like healthy DNA. And that's really what's at the heart of this. So they started to invent medications that they could give you that basically use a deactivated retrovirus to go into your body and alleviate the symptoms in a way that exceeded anything they had done in the past. So my sister, in 2016, had her second child and started hemorrhaging in her lungs. So that she was coughing up so much blood that she almost died of blood loss. She, instead of dying at 20, she lived till 30, and then she lived till 35, and she now has 2 kids, and she's still healthy and living on. And about the same time, they invented this new medication they call Trikafta. And now she takes it, I think, daily. I don't remember. In addition to that digestive enzyme she takes. But it alleviates the respiratory system so much that for the first time in like 2 decades, she started to gain respiratory function instead of lose it cumulatively over time. Awesome. So it's looked like she might go on living. And I think one time she went to her doctor and she's like, "Doctor, what should I do about this particular thing I'm having?" And the doctor looked at her and he says, "I don't know." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And he said, "There's never been anyone like you. There's never been anyone with cystic fibrosis that's had 2 kids and lived to the age of 35 in the history of ever. You're the first one."
Aw, people are going to write papers about her.
Right. So she's, I don't know, she's she's almost the same age as you. I think she turns 39 this year. And yeah, so she's still with us. I had to reprogram my kid brain that always just thought she was going to die. I'm glad she's still with us. I didn't want her to die. It was really deeply ingrained in there. It took me a long time to get used to the fact that she's not going anywhere because medicine has gotten better at a rate sufficient to preserve her life.
That's awesome, Ben. And I'm glad that your sister's doing well. And it sounds like even though these were very negative circumstances, they had a very positive impact on your development as an oldest sibling. I don't think that's bad at brothering. I think that's just you correctly identified a point in your life where your brotherly, familial, protective senses became heightened or you were aware of them. I don't know. That said, I'm going to bring us back the way that I do. The way that you want points for, I forget what you were doing earlier. Hang on. Oh, yeah. You wanted points for not hazing the Italians. I want points for not taking you to the mattresses about how many times we've argued about the cost of medicine in America when your family actively seeked out socialized medicine to provide for your sister.
All right, but is the cost for not going down that right now, Josh? If I had gotten government-provided socialized medicine, my sister would be dead now. I think it was the innovation of the American medical system that's preserved her life. And I think that's because it's not socialized. I can tell you really want to continue this debate, but I think she's still alive because we didn't get socialized medicine.
Do you think medicine, like research, doesn't exist in other countries besides America? You think we are at the cutting edge of medical research and development, Ben? Again, you're right. You are absolutely right. We should not have this conversation right now because, boy, I just want to tear you to pieces about it. Moving on.
Okay, so one last point I want to make about all of that, and that is my sister. If you're interested in someone with an ebullient zeal for life that is really interesting, my sister started her own podcast. It's called Stuff with Moms. Check it out. She's amazing. I think you'll love it.
Everybody should go listen to Stuff with Moms with an asterisk. If she doesn't plug our podcast 1-for-1 the times that we plug her podcast, then I'm withdrawing my recommendation.
I'm already in her debt, Josh. I think they've got like 4 times that they've plugged our podcast. So.
Oh, wow. Okay, so yes, Stuff with Moms. Go listen to them.
A while back, sometimes you and I will have ideas faster than we can put out new episodes and additional content. And a way long time ago, you're like, hey, we should talk about someday why our kids today have it better with kids shows than we did when we were kids. So since this is your idea, I'll let you set out the terms of the discussion. This will be our main segment today.
Cool beans. So this is going to be a mix of a couple of things. And because it's my segment, it's going to be a little more loosey-goosey, a little more freeform. A little more memory and spur-of-the-moment based, very much a live discussion between the two of us. So here is my hypothesis, all right? I remember this idea catalyzing in my brain when I was sitting on the couch watching a show that my kids wanted to watch. And I actually wanted to watch it with them because they asked me, hey, can we watch this show? And I was like, ooh, yes, let's watch that show. And it's admittedly a kid's show. And it broke my threshold of, wait a minute, this is not for me. I am not the target audience of this television show. Why am I so engaged on it? And I started thinking about the episodes that I had seen of this show and the different themes and how it was put together. And I realized kids' shows are just better nowadays than they were when we were kids. So that's my hypothesis. And I've got specific examples. I think we can talk about specific shows. I think we can talk about general themes and tropes. I think we can talk about changes in technology and how that's driven different business decisions for writing and production. So where do you want to start?
Well, so first I'm curious, what show was it you were watching when you had that epiphany?
Specifically, I was watching Steven Universe. Have you ever seen this show?
No. What is it?
Okay. So Steven Universe is a really goofy kids show about how do I do a synopsis for this? It's about aliens that are energy beings that are embedded in gems. They're actual gemstones, and they project like bodies. They look like people, but they're not. They're gems. And they're immortal, and they've been around forever. And they have this enormous galactic empire that overlapped with Earth because one of their leaders was sent to colonize it. And the leaders found like humans, like cavemen humans, and like really appreciated the life and the diversity of the planet. And so instead of strip mining it for resources, they started this intergalactic civil war. But not all of that is like this deep plot that exists like in the background of this show about this kid who is half human, half gemstone, living with like a handful of other gems. And he's just like the most wholesome TV character I've ever seen. This kid is in the show purportedly 10 years old. And just the conflicts that he has in his day-to-day life. Yeah, one episode is they're fighting intergalactic villains. And the next episode, he's helping a friend deal with the fact that he doesn't want to work at his dad's fry shop for his summer job. But the way that they interact with the characters and the very, very real conversations that they have, there's this ongoing will they, won't they with the two teenagers that work at the donut shop. And like, it's just so great. And this kid is so good at conflict resolution and working through emotions and verbalizing his feelings and talking out all of his problems.
Wow, I've never even seen a single episode of this. I'll go check it out after this because you got me. It sounds interesting.
It's a running theme in the show that they'll have an antagonist that they physically have to battle. And inevitably, this kid will persuade them to switch sides. Like just talking through their problems. They'll end up in a situation where they have to speak and they just resolve the conflict. Like this, in canon of the universe, it's like thousands of years our two sides have been at war, but you know what? You're right. I don't really like what's going on. So for me personally, I'm going to make this choice for me.
Do your kids find it engaging? Can they sit through it? Did they ever get bored?
No. And this show specifically, like the episodes are only 15 minutes long or something. They might even be shorter than that. And like They do the new thing that all kids shows are doing now, where it's not just like one and done episodes, where it's not like, oh, here's the premise, and then we have a one-shot adventure that everybody forgets about forever. It's one of those consistent timelines. You'll have an episode, that's goofy, but everything that happens in that episode is then referenced later. Even if it didn't seem like it was important at the time, it adds to the lore and to the background and to everything that has happened in the show.
Okay.
And so it's constantly building.
You're kind of alluding to some paradigms of the past, so let's contrast it with the way it used to be.
Yes.
Let's say the name of this show again that you're talking about.
Steven Universe.
Steven Universe. So if you went back in time 20 or 30 years, what was the show 30 years ago that was the equivalent of Steven Universe? What was filling that show's place in the marketplace?
The closest thing that I could think would probably be Care Bears.
Care Bears.
You
so
have
there's like this ensemble cast of like things that are colorful and interesting in Steven Universe.
Yeah. You've got
there
the
a happy
gems,
one and a grumpy one and a
they have different
one
well, this is the thing. Like the Care Bears were just caricatures, right? They each like epitomized whatever they were representative of, whereas each of the characters in Steven Universe has like dedicated plot lines to exploring the inner turmoil and trauma that they have. Here's a great example. One of his constant companions that is like the motherly type, like the organized one, the one that keeps everything moving and going forward. She's not the boss, but she's just like the support person, makes sure everything happens. The indispensable number 2. Turns out that she was in love with Steven's mom at the same time that his dad, his human dad, was. And now there is constant like tension between this character and the dad because they both love the same person that is now dead and gone. And like
you're right, that's a very complex plot line, unlike anything that ever was in Care Bears.
And they explore that. Like they have these two characters discuss their feelings about each other because of this third person they both loved.
Okay. So we got Steven Universe and we got Care Bears. I'm reflecting on Care Bears. My memory isn't great for this, but I remember there being some kind of overarching conflict. I know there was a movie that came out at some point that really brought this out, that there was some kind of evil force that they were trying to defeat that was doom and gloom and trying to make people sad all the time. It was like the Mr. Freeze in the fourth Batman movie. He didn't really have things thought out. He just wanted everything to be cold. And that's what it was like in Care Bears. There was this bad guy that wanted to make everyone gloomy and sad all the time, and the Care Bears were trying to stop that. I guess. And then they did have personalities, but there wasn't really a plot arc. There wasn't development. It was just little adventures of them.
Exactly. That I feel like this is one of the key differences between shows then and shows now. Is shows when we were kids, they had a premise, and then that was it. Like all right, we've got 20 minutes. Here's the setup. And it was almost sketch comedy at that point for the writers. Yeah. That's right, something that we think kids will enjoy. Let's keep it very surface level because kids are dumb. Let's make sure it doesn't go talk about any other episodes because we have no idea what the sequencing of the airing date these are going to be. Like they're going to rerun this to death. There's no guarantee that they're going to watch it in order. So we're going to contain a 20-minute story into one thing, and then we're going to forget it ever happened.
So if you're a writer or a creator and you're spending all your time to create this story that's nuanced and maybe a little bit more adult in nature, or at least using themes that only adults could pick up on and listen to, what's in it for you? Is it just help you stay engaged, or are you simultaneously trying to engage both audiences? Are you trying to write something for kids that the adults will sit still for so they'll watch the advertisements too? Or are you just like, I got to make a show for kids, but I might as well make it interesting for me so that I don't hate my life?
So... Maybe, because there are shows that are like that. There are shows that, like there are other shows, good kids shows now that we like and we like to watch. I'm going to think specifically of like Phineas and Ferb, where it's still kind of old school in that like it's mostly episodic. They have some movies that build to the canon or whatever.
Yeah, but they're kind of dependent on everything being back to normal at the end of every episode.
Yes, and that's one of the shtick. They build that in as one of their running gags. And this is the difference, is that they're not trying to engage the adult audience, but they're putting in enough to make it tolerable for the adult audience.
Oh, I can sit through an episode of Phineas and Ferb every time because I can just laugh at Dr. Doofenshmirtz or the little camera winks or the in-jokes and all of it.
I love Phineas and Ferb, but it is way different than Steven Universe what I'm talking about. And like I could gush about Steven Universe for 45 minutes nonstop.
Okay, well, let's not do that because I haven't seen it. I'll check it out.
Can I give one more story about Steven Universe?
Okay.
I'm sorry. This is
going to be a bonus episode, listeners. I'm the editor.
All right, so the gems can do this thing where they combine and they turn into a new thing. Like there's two gemstones, but it's a new like body.
Then they're the Thundercats.
No, hang on. But they cage it in very intimate terms. Like it is like from the adult perspective, this is them having sex. Okay.
The Care Bears did that too. They did the Care Bear stare, and they all had to do it together.
Would you let me get through my premise? Like, I'm just setting this up. They do this thing where they can combine into a third person, and then it's basically sex for their species. It's fusing. They fuse.
Fusing.
And they fuse their two gems together and create an entirely new person, but it is a being that is a conglomerate of the two previous to them. Okay? Here's the thing. They have one character that is a permanent fusion. It's still two characters that decided that they loved each other so much they wanted to be together and be that fused person forever. And they consider themselves married. They get married in the show. But they constantly, like in order to fight the evils that they're going through, they will fuse with the other characters and create more powerful versions of themselves with specific skill sets to overcome things. There was one episode where one of the characters was creating the circumstances that necessitated them to fuse with the other character because she liked how it made her feel to be fused with the other two fused characters.
Okay.
And the entire next episode was the permanently fused married character splitting because the two characters that were fused had two very different reactions to this person using them to fuse without their knowledge. Like one of them was like incredibly
angry.
That's a really
interesting, nuanced, complex theme about adult sexuality.
One character was incredibly angry with the third person because they were using us. They lied to us about this. The other person's like, it already happened. They are our friend. We need to find a way to move past this.
Wow. We could spend the whole time just talking about that and what that means and what they were trying to do and stuff, but I don't want to get drugged down by that.
This is a kid's show. And like, this is like, it is, that episode gave me the tools that I need as a parent to have a legitimate conversation about intimacy and deceit with my kids.
Huh. Wow. Do you think that was their aim?
I don't know, but thank you. Because next, if it happens to them in high school, we're going to watch that episode of Steven Universe, and then we're going to have a long talk about it.
Huh. Wow. All right. Well, what are some other examples you thought of ones that our kids have today? I'd like to think this goes by the thing of, I forget who said it. I'm going to give another false quote attribution here. I'll attribute this one to Abraham Lincoln. If I rise up, it is only because I stand on the shoulders of giants. I don't know who said that. But, the idea that, like, yeah, the shows today are better, but they didn't create them in a vacuum. They created them by building on the innovations of those in the past and coming up with new ones and creating something better.
So, yes, if we want to talk about innovations of the past, like trickling into other medias, then let's talk about this for a second. Instead of me picking another show, let's talk about technology for a minute. Because one of the things, what we were just complaining about was how kids' shows in the past, there was no continuity. There was no canon. There was a premise, a story, and it was wrapped up, reset, new day. It's just summer forever. We're just going to keep building crazy gadgets that our mom never catches us doing.
Yeah.
But then there are shows that don't do that. Like Avatar: The Last Airbender was the first show that I can remember having an episode-to-episode arc where there are some episodes where you really needed to have seen it. And just the thing that screams at you.
You're like, why are they friends with Zuko all of a sudden? Like, isn't he their sworn enemy?
And this was the first kids show I can remember that had to have a previously on Avatar. And like at the beginning of the show, they had to spend like 45
to tell you how
seconds.
We got to where we're at.
Here are the key points that happened in the last 3 seasons that you have to know or this episode won't make sense.
Okay, I get what you're saying, but that isn't new. I mean, if you watch Transformers back in the 80s, or like previously on Transformers, and they show Starscream shooting, whatever, Megatron, and now he's dead, and so that's whatever, just... There were things that changed, and they'd have to catch you up so you could be up to speed for what you're about to watch.
Well, I must be too young then to remember the previously on Transformers. I just like the cars because I was a kid.
Yeah.
But now they don't. There's shows that they don't have to do that anymore. There are episodic shows like Steven Universe doesn't have previously on, but it's a constant moving discussion.
I like what you're getting at.
And I think
there's a fundamental technological thing happening here.
Yes.
That is the broadcast of an animation is transmitting a fantastic amount of data. And in the past, we didn't have the capacity to store that data. We could only view it in real time as it came into our living rooms. So we could only take whatever it was they were sending right now, and they were paying for that by selling you breakfast cereal. And so they would send you 20 minutes of cartoon mixed in with 10 minutes of breakfast cereal commercials, and that's what you got. And then tomorrow, if you happen to be there, the next time you could watch the next one, but they needed to show it over a period of 10 weeks, and they didn't have time to make more, so they would just rebroadcast the one from last week again. They'd be out of order, and you wouldn't, and so they kind of had to assume that you weren't going to be able to consume it in order, and so that it needed to stand on its own, and those limitations of the storage of data and the way that it was funded created this environment where it constrained the narrative format to a very strong set of rules that made it what it was.
The writers, the storytellers, even if they wanted to tell a quality story like that, knew they didn't have the time. They had 20 minutes. 2, their audience is not going to suffer through that. And 3, they didn't have the technology to guarantee that viewers would have the same viewing experience whenever the media was consumed.
Right.
Enter streaming. Thank you, Netflix. Sponsor the podcast.
Yeah, and there were some middle steps. VHS and DVD kind of intermediated, but it wasn't for a long time that they would actually release like a series of cartoons that originally came out in syndication on TV on a DVD or VHS.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You're older than me. Maybe you know better. But the only time I can ever remember the canon of one of these episodic shows changing would be at like a season finale. Like they would do a season of the show, and then they would have like a straight to VHS 1-hour movie special, like G.I. Joe and the Weather Dominator or whatever. and then that would become canon for the start of the next season. That's the only time I ever feel like the canon changed in these shows.
Yeah, one thing about cartoons, that a tool that it gives to writers is they don't have actors that are growing up, so they can just have things always stay the same and kind of constrain it to telling a story within the same set of circumstances. Like, I remember on the Flintstones, way back in the day, when there was an episode where Pebbles and Bam Bam grew up. Like, they were born at one point, and it changed, Fred and Wilma and Barney and Wilma's... Fred and Wilma and Barney and Betty's lives, that they now had 2 babies that were part of the family. But they were allowed to carry that on for like 7 years where they were still just babies. Anyway, there was one where they actually grew up, and it changed everything. It changed the whole tenor and aim of the show, and it's better that they could just keep them. Like The Simpsons is the longest running show in the history of television, and Maggie's still a baby 35 years later, and it's kind of a running joke.
Yeah, I don't. Whose choice is that though? Is that the writing staff? Like, no, like we don't want to progress because again, you think of shows that have run. I'm thinking specifically of Scrubs because I watched that and it was on for 9 years. 9 years, and even the writers of the show realized, hey, they can't be interns or medical students forever. And so, like, the show starts and they're just starting at this hospital, but by the end of the 9th season, like, Turk is the head of medicine, and like Dr. Cox is now the head of the hospital and all this. Like, they realize that these people have to progress in their careers, but then you're running out of writing space. Everybody had a kid, like all the relationships had been done. Like, there's no more creative room with these people. They keep getting older. How dare they?
I think the fundamental change is that we gained the capacity to store and deliver information on demand, and that they could control it sufficiently that there wasn't this bottleneck of having to sell you VHS cassettes or DVDs. So now at the end point where it's originally consumed, the viewer has the ability to choose what they want to see, which means they'll want to see it in the order that it was designed. And that changes one of the fundamental assumptions of the storytelling and allows the writers to then expand their scope so that they're telling long-form stories in a short-form consumption format.
Notably, it's a tool because you don't have to do this, and not everyone has made this transition. Go back to Phineas and Ferb. Phineas and Ferb is perfectly happy doing the 20-minute episode of Phineas and Ferb build a ridiculous thing, Candace never catches them, and Perry the Platypus somehow defeats Doofenshmirtz.
Foils some plan of Dr. Doofenshmirtz.
Yeah, and they're perfectly fine with that shtick. Notably, Phineas and Ferb has a custom-written song performed for every single episode. That's one of their big highlights, is they have a band on retainer. Hey, guys, you've got a week. Come up with a new song about shoelace aglets.
It's a delightful throwback with a little bit of, new form. It's still good to watch as a grown-up because there's some decidedly grown-up jokes.
Absolutely. And at the same time, writers also have the ability to, like, they can pitch a show where we're going to have serialized episodes that need to be consumed in order for the show to make sense. Avatar: The Last Airbender, Steven Universe, She-Ra. There's a new Voltron that's out that my son's been watching.
She-Ra there's new episodes of She-Ra coming out?
Not coming out, came out. Are you not aware of this? There is a new She-Ra cartoon that exists, and like I've watched only a handful of the episodes, but the real big thing that shook up the world with this one was the homosexual relationship that happens between She-Ra and the antagonist. Spoilers for She-Ra, everybody.
Okay, so this is taking me back to the 80s. So back in the 80s, there was a cartoon called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It's relatively well known on the internet just because of how kooky the bad guy Skeletor was, and he was a walking meme back in his day, and now that it can be serialized on the internet, he's all over the place. But after He-Man had been popular for a couple of years and proven its ability to sell toys to children, they're like, well, there's this whole girls' toys market that we're not tapping in on. He-Man's got this obscure friend called She-Ra. Let's give her own spin-off television series. And then She-Ra came out, and she got her own show, and she got to be the hero. And now we're selling toys to girls, too. Success as far as a cartoon maker is concerned. Was there overarching plot and change over time? Nah, it was just Skeletor's the bad guy, He-Man's the good guy, and whatever. Like I don't remember anything about it.
We always love.
I remember wanting the toys.
We talk about the toys giving unrealistic expectations of
body image.
What your body image, yeah, and that's the classic example is Barbie for girls. Like, you can't have a waistline that small. You shouldn't. It's unhealthy. contrasted with the He-Man toys where his biceps were like 64 inches around or something.
Yeah.
If he was real life size, which is absurdly large. There are bodybuilders that are not nearly as muscled as He-Man was. So that's like, it was just bad all over. The entire toy industry was just out to get us back in the 80s.
So I have that really just delicious old-time reminiscence of when I was a kid and I used to wake up early on Saturday mornings when I knew that there wasn't going to be like boring golf or adult television shows and I could just sit and watch cartoons for like 3 hours. So I was looking back through some lists and trying to figure out, what were my favorites and were any of them any good or were they following all these rules that Josh said? So I made a tier list of the cartoons in the 80s, but when I looked at a list from cartoons in the 80s, I realized I was looking at cartoons that came out new in the 80s. And then I realized that a lot of the ones I watched back in the 80s were old ones that were in syndication. Some that came out like in the 50s and 60s. And as you start to look at them, you realize you can kind of see the morality of those. For instance, Tom and Jerry, all those episodes we used to watch as kids, those all came out in the 40s and 50s. Like all
that
of
long,
them.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I would have assumed it was the 60s, but 40s and 50s, that's really old.
Yeah, but you kind of do. But then you look at it and you see them like drinking alcohol and smoking. And like if they would get blown up with explosives, they would look like a black person in blackface painting. And just, a lot of stuff that were not at all culturally sensitive for the time period in which we live. But everyone just laughed off as that's a kid's show. However, Simpsons, in a very wry bit of satire, created that show on The Simpsons called Itchy and Scratchy and kind of pointed out the ridiculousness of us growing up as children watching Tom and Jerry. Well, by taking it to its extreme.
I would argue that in the 40s and 50s, when they first made these animations, they probably weren't aimed at kids. They might have been aimed at like adults. Huh. Like it was in late 30s, I think, is when Snow White came out, the first feature-length animated movie, and that was not for children. Like it was just a new media, and they didn't know who to target it at. I don't know when the transition happened, but it obviously happened between 1930 and 1960 or 70, that they decided, you know what, animation is for children, and this is who is going to consume our animated media.
Yeah, same kind of goes for Looney Tunes that we watch all growing up. They started in the 1930s and just continued on. You can watch any one and not know when it came from. You got Wile E. Coyote chasing the Roadrunner and Elmer Fudd and Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny and Foghorn Leghorn and the whole crew. All those guys. I was looking at others from like the 50s and 60s. Rocky and Bullwinkle, Woody Woodpecker, Yogi Bear,
Rocky
Underdog.
Bullwinkle. I used to watch Rocky and Bullwinkle before school every day.
But those
Professor
are good
Peabody and the Wayback Machine.
Yes, it just nothing ever changed. It was just they were always adversaries, but every time it was back to square one.
Notably, Boris and Natasha. Looking back, they were Russian and they were the bad guys. I wonder why Russians were the bad guys in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, good question. Then there were the ones that kind of came out in the late 70s, early 90s. I enjoyed some of the ones that were kind of trying to be more multicultural, like the Harlem Globetrotters or Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. There was the superhero ones. There was the Spider-Man. There was the Marvel Universe ones. There was like Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends. And then there was the DC Universe ones called Super Friends. I loved when those would come on as a kid. Then there was the like way back Flintstones, which was surprisingly progressive. Did you know that the Flintstones was the first broadcast television show ever to show a married couple in the same bed together?
I think I did know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is mind-blowing.
In sitcoms, they used to show adults' bedrooms as having twin beds on opposite sides of the room.
I think that's how people slept back then.
But no, it wasn't. It's just what it was on TV. But then Fred and Wilma actually were in the same bed together talking.
I don't know. I've consumed some other media that said no. It was like you just had like beds were just one size, and you just had two beds in the same room, and that's where the adults slept.
Not in my experience. There was Space Ghost, Mighty Mouse, Popeye
Ghost.
the Sailor.
Yeah,
I loved that show as a kid. It felt like a spinach propaganda program.
So one, I like spinach, and two, let's talk about unrealistic body images again, and talk about Popeye and the.
I know sailors were aspiring to look like Popeye.
Well, and like forearms that are like cannons, and these dinky little biceps and triceps. It's because if you think the only way to open a can is by crushing it open, yeah, of course you're going to have massive forearms.
But Probably the classic, and one I think that's transcended its time, is Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo's a great... It came out in the late 60s, and it was just like this group of hippie kids that were very stereotypical hippies, running around, believing in ghosts, chasing away the bad guy. Every episode, it was back to square one, same thing, no change, no progression over time. Great example of this episodic kind of paradigm in storytelling. But somehow it's become, 2 or 3 movies that have happened over and over, and there's even recent episodes and versions of it.
Well, the most recent version of Scooby-Doo has failed spectacularly because the people that remade it completely lost sight of what was appealing about that show.
Yeah.
And it's been really bad.
So those were all the old ones that were kind of the staples that filled in most of the time. But then there were the new ones that were coming out during that time period. So I made a tier list of the cartoons from the 80s that I watched growing up. So I'm going to start with the F tier and work up to the S tier. So at the F tier, there was shows like Wuzzles, Kissy Fur, and Ewoks. Just
I've never seen any
shows
of those.
that I think were designed. This is the 7 years older than you talking. Those were those are kid shows where they're cute, fuzzy animals that were really just designed to sell you toys. Another example in the F tier are RoboCop and Rambo. Don't ask me how you have ultra-violent R-rated movies that come out and some executives sit around going, we really need to get the kids on the action here.
Super easy. They're not shooting bullets, they're shooting lasers, and instead of shooting people, they're shooting robots. Done. Easy. Package it up.
Yeah, but still, I can't believe that they took those 2 ultraviolet, gory movies and turned them into kid shows. That's what you did back in the 80s.
This really psychologically impacting action flick that we targeted squarely at middle-aged men. I'll bet we can repackage that for kids. No problem.
Yeah, crazy. E tier, Snorks, GoBots, Silverhawks, Bravestar. I think these were all toys first and cartoons second.
I've heard of Bravestar, but I don't think I've ever seen it.
Then there was Police Academy, which was a R-rated comedy movie series that I guess which made a surprisingly good children's cartoon. It was just kooky cops being silly, and it was kind of funny and interesting. I gave that one E tier. D tier, these are ones I guess I liked. Gem and the Holograms, which sounds like the old version of what you were talking about, that cartoon earlier. I forgot the name of it again.
Just because they're called Gems. I think Gem was a band, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Mask. Again, I think these are just cartoons designed to sell you toys. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, the Mask. It's I feel like Mask was a G.I. Joe ripoff where they just had different helmets with stuff.
Yes, right? Yes. And that's what the toys were like. I think I may have had 1 or 2. C tier, which is now where the cartoons were better than the toys. Thundercats, Voltron. Although I was always envious of the kid whose parents had gotten him all 5 Voltron toys and
all
could
the lions,
form them all into the giant robot. Why would you ever want just one of those? You need them all. It's a brilliant toy making strategy.
We're gonna price each one of them at $59.99. The kids will not shut up until they have all 5.
Now, there was a whole subgenre of things that had been in past Disney cartoons that then they turned into a serialized cartoon. So Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers came out back in the 80s. That was a good example. Chip and Dale were just, running around the background of Mickey Mouse cartoons back in the 50s and hey, let's give these guys their own show and we'll make them detectives that are solving crimes and helping children. That was fine. I'll give that C tier.
C tier? No, Rescue Rangers has got to be B tier. Come on.
Inspector Gadget also.
I watched every Inspector Gadget that ever came out.
Yeah. The Real Ghostbusters. I liked The Real Ghostbusters because I felt like the movie had so much interesting ideas it was provoking, but just movies are too slow and short of a format to really flesh out an idea. But a cartoon that runs over and over gives you an opportunity to be like, hey, what if there was this bunch of guys in New York City running around busting ghosts? What are some of the adventures they would have? So I enjoyed that.
You like the cartoon better than the show?
All right, that brings me to my B tier. Transformers is in my B tier. Dungeons and Dragons, both cartoons I looked forward to watching on Saturday mornings. He-Man and the Master of the Universe, and of course She-Ra, Princess of Power. And I'm grouping these into their genres. You got the high tech ones, the fantasy ones, and now I don't know what to call these, the Muppet Babies, the Smurfs, Alvin and the Chipmunks, anthropomorphic animals. Although I don't know what's going on with the Smurfs. How did that species even reproduce?
Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. Why did Gargamel want to eat them? That entire franchise makes no sense.
The A tier, I've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and DuckTales. The Care Bears, My Little Pony, G.I. Joe, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And then in my S tier, I've got The Simpsons, which came out in 1989, which has kind of transcended its role as a cartoon and been more of like the longest running sitcom of all time. And my all-time favorite cartoon, The Adventures of the Gummy Bears.
Oh, I remember Gummy Bears. They had some potion that made them bounce. That was the stupidest premise. Was it like medieval times or something too? Like, what was even happening in this show?
Okay, you were too young to appreciate it. There was this isolated colony of just a few gummy bears that had been separated from this ancient civilization of wise gummy bears that had all these high-tech things. And so they just inherited like these technological devices and magical spells that they were just scratching at the surface of trying to find out the lore of the powerful civilization of gummies in the past.
And they were always there was an ancient advanced civilization and we barely understand what they had.
Yeah, and so then they were always trying to search to see if they still existed or if they could find them or learn how to use the things that they created. And meanwhile, there were humans that knew about the existence of the gummy bears that had nefarious needs for the technology and capabilities of the gummy bears that they were trying to take. So there was this interaction between the humans that did or didn't know the gummy bears existed and the gummy bears trying to find out the history of their past. And it was my favorite, and I still love it. And I showed it to my kids, and they loved it too.
What an interesting allegory that could be for so many things. I'm going to go with scientists trying to make life in the world better for people and the military-industrial complex trying to use it to destroy each other.
Okay.
Very Cold War-y. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that because, up through this time period, there was always this kind of looming menace of the Red Scare and how that kind of reared its head in all of this. That, like in G.I. Joe and in...
that whole idea, the Cold War, just permeated all of everything. Like every movie that was made in that time frame just has this assumed looming Russian threat in American media.
Yeah, the Decepticons were kind of like that. I don't feel like it was there in Scooby-Doo, but maybe. I don't know, Popeye.
Okay, now I wanted to mention Scooby-Doo because I remember Scooby-Doo specifically for being... It has to have innovated in the lowest budget animation that money could buy. Like you could almost see the tricks that they were using to have, I swear there is only like 7 frames. They only had to draw Shaggy 7 times in different poses. And that's everything that he does in every episode of the show. And then they just have them on those transparencies, right? So they paint like an elaborate background. They have the transparency of the characters and they just like stop motion, like slide it around to make a move and stuff.
Now, like the point you're making earlier about adult jokes and kids shows is Shaggy, I think, was supposed to be a pothead. I never picked up on that as a kid.
What? The dude can barely talk. Like he looks terrible and he's constantly hungry. Canonically in the show, him and the dog are about as smart as each other. Like that was the message that they were trying to send.
Yeah. Completely sailed over my head. Oof.
Then you've got like the ascot wearing Pretty Boy, and like don't get me started on Scooby-Doo and those stupid characters.
So as we're talking about this, we can look at these old shows and see the permeation of the idea of it reflecting the values of society. Some of these you can go back and watch and they're still entertaining, but some of you can see, wow, we've really gotten a lot better at this. Like there's no need to go back and watch this old stuff. Some of them were just trying to sell us stuff, and that stuff isn't even for sale anymore, so they don't really even have a purpose to exist. Some of them, we've changed so much that they aren't even good. Like, you can go back and look at, like, Looney Tunes is a good example. You got, like, Pepe Le Pew and cross-dressing and blackface and racism and fat-shaming and just lots of really terrible things that we've moved on from that as a society. Now it's just kind of this curious historical artifact.
Yes.
But they did serve a purpose. They allowed us to expand upon IPs that we love in a way that was more budget friendly, like the Ghostbusters or the Ewoks or whatever. They allowed us to explore the fantastical. We had superheroes, fantasy, science fiction. I forgot to mention the Jetsons. They allow us to escape from reality. We have characters that don't die even though they're in perilous situations. We got amazing things happening. Kids are the heroes, talking animals, all kinds of cool stuff. And then they're a lens by which we examine ourselves. We look at outsiders. We have fantastical animations of the imagination of the future. These are all great things that these kind of shows have to offer to us, and yet there was so much more to be learned.
Well, and that's I'm thank you for tacking on that a little bit at the end, because like I almost was going to berate you for missing my point entirely. Yes, those are things
so much more to be learned.
Through the lens of retrospect, we could apply all of these highbrow things to old cartoons, but in the end, a lot of them were just peddling toys at children.
Yeah.
Whereas now we have like an entire library of shows that are the kids are the target audience, but they're really tackling some really difficult subject matter. Here's another good example.
Give some more good examples.
Have you ever watched Bluey?
Yeah, so that was produced in Australia, right?
Yes, it's from Australia. It's about Australian cattle dogs living anthropomorphically, and there's so many little. They do both the things. They do, one, really good content for kids that kids can understand. Two, they make very complex topics approachable for children if you cage it in the right way. And three, there are so many subtle jokes for the adults if you know to look for them. For example, they're all dogs, right? The parents both have jobs. The mom is a security specialist at the airport, and the dad is an archaeologist. The mom is a drug-sniffing dog, and the dad digs up bones. Like, they're both doing dog things in this universe.
But they get paid for them, and it allows them to support their family.
Yes, exactly. Okay, now, to get real for a second, there was... Oh, man, my daughter's been obsessed with this show, and I just couldn't help but watch it with her. There is one episode where the youngest girl is pretending to be pregnant and has like a balloon under her shirt or under her sweater or whatever she's wearing.
Okay, so it makes her tummy puff out.
Right, and then they're just doing goofy like little kid pretending to be pregnant stuff. But then she like moved wrong or bumped into something and the balloon popped. And it's so like you blink and you miss it. But they cut to the parents, and both the parents, like their facial expressions don't change, like their body language doesn't change. But the dad reaches over and grabs the mom's hand and just holds it for a second. And then it cuts back to the kids and they keep going on with the plot and the story. But like if the kids have no idea what that was. They just showed the parents' reaction. It's not that big a deal. But parents,
to an adult watching this, you see maybe the pain of a past miscarriage passed between two adults.
Yeah, you see like, oh, there's something there. Wow. There was another episode where the mom's sister came, and the mom's sister hasn't been around for like 4 years, and like that's just like this subtext, this context that's happening between the two adults that are around the kids, and it felt so true to life where the kids are just doing their thing, and there's stuff that's flying over their heads that they're not catching just because of the way that adults interact. But it's at one point in this episode, they're all playing together, the mom, her sister, and the two girls, and they have this discussion, and I cannot remember the words that they used verbatim, but like the one of the kids asking like, why is she sad all the time? Well, there's something that she wants but she can't have. It's like, well, why can't she just have it? Well, sometimes, and she's trying to explain to this daughter without saying it, that her sister is barren, and like it's hard for her to interact with young children because she wants a kid so bad, and like it just hits so hard. But for like my daughter in the room, she's like, yeah, sometimes we can't have the things that we want. And I'm over here like tearing up like, yeah, sometimes it's hard.
Yeah, you're right. It's like it took an entire generation for us to realize that children's entertainment just doesn't have to be shallow and superficial. That kids actually are capable of experiencing deep emotions, or at least not having them, have them pass through them in a way that's meaningful at their level.
Maybe this goes back to my broader topic that I've brought up a couple times. I'm having this thought now, so please feel free to disregard it and move on without talking about it. But I've mentioned that I feel like the way that you and I grew up and the values and stuff that we were instilled with, especially as boys, was emotions are bad and are to be hated. If you have a feeling, push it way down deep into your stomach and save it for never. But now it seems like our generation has agreed, or as we get older, we're starting to see that that's probably not the most healthy way to deal with complex feelings and emotions or trauma or the things that you experienced as a kid. And it's almost like we're trying to translate that into ways that's more approachable to children. Like we're trying to arm them with information or techniques or ideas or words or something. Just give them some tools to process these big feelings that kids do have. And it's probably unhealthy for us to either disregard or shut them down.
Yeah. No, I like it. Even if we kind of put aside all these serialized long cartoons that we're talking aside and look at something simple like a Disney movie, look at the difference in like Snow White versus Finding Nemo. I mean, look at all of the complexity of the storytelling and the emotions and stuff, as opposed to just like girl loves boy, witch hates girl, girl triumphs, boy and girl live happily ever after, as opposed to like dad loses family, dad clings to only remaining family member he has too tightly, and it's causing a strain between them. You're like, wow, such a huge difference.
You're right. That is an enormous difference. I have to go back to Snow White for a second. Somebody pointed this out to me, and it's blown my mind ever since. First of all, Snow White had no interaction with the prince, I don't think, at the beginning of the movie. I think these bad things just happened to her without her realizing why. But think about it from Snow White's perspective. She was in this cottage in the forest, and an old lady came with an apple. Like, this is a magic apple. Take a bite, and your every wish will be fulfilled. And then from Snow White's perspective, she bit the apple, she fell asleep,
wakes
and
up,
she woke up with a prince and all of her friends celebrating around her. So from Snow White's perspective...
The witch was the witch of wish fulfillment.
The witch was totally legit, and that apple did everything she thought it was going to do.
I've never heard that fan theory before, Josh, but I love it. That is awesome. Well, I'm trying to think about the kids. So a lot of the kids shows you're talking about, my kids have gotten too old. Like, I guess they watched some of those. Did you have any others that were on your list?
I don't think of, those are the ones that I've consumed personally. And so my kids watch other shows that, I haven't consumed enough of it to say whether or not it's like super legit. One of the shows they love is The Amazing World of Gumball, which I don't think is arming us like in any kind of emotional way, but I appreciate because it's the only show I've ever seen that has like 6 or 7 different animation styles in every episode. Some of the characters in the show are stop motion animated. Some of the characters are full 3D CGI, and most of the other characters are just 2D animation.
I'm glad we've reached a point where creating something that you can learn from the lessons of the past, reflect the values of the day, and give kids more credit can allow us to create something great. In chapter 3 of The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, he contrasts the ideas that were developed in laboratories and studies to lead to the development of Sesame Street, and he contrasts that with Blue's Clues 20 years later. And he talks about how Sesame Street had this central idea that basically they wanted to teach children through television, this new medium of television, but they recognized that children didn't have very long attention spans, so they needed to serialize it and make it like a digest format, like a magazine, where you're just turning pages and on every page is something new and interesting and distracting. And if you watch a Sesame Street episode, it's like that. Yeah, there's kind of a theme in that there's a number of the day and a letter of the day, but it doesn't, there's no real overarching story. It's just turn the page and there's a new sketch and a new sketch and a new sketch.
Yeah, what kind of like lazy writing is it to just have recurring segments that you keep bringing up over and over in a serialized media that you put out? That just seems like it's sloppy.
Yeah, what the heck? And then he contrasts that with Blue's Clues that completely threw all of that on its ear, and how behind the idea of creating the show Blue's Clues, there was a similar amount of research and scientific theory behind the idea that you could just have a host that looked directly in the camera and just took the kids with him along on this single, slow-paced, singular idea that led kids from one idea to another and completely changed the world of children's television. It gave them more credit than we were in the past.
Blue's Clues. I remember Blue's Clues was big when I was in high school, and my sister loved it, and she was watching it all the time. And I remember folding laundry in the room where she's watching it and just being infuriated with the pacing. Like, you have got to go faster. You have got to be the dumbest adult I've ever met.
Yeah.
Also, contrast that with the fact that Steve was acting in a complete, like, blue screen set. There was nothing real around him. Like, that poor guy. I saw an interview with him at one point, and they asked him what was the most difficult thing about shooting Blue's Clues. And he said, hands down, it was drawing the clues in the notebook. And they said this because apparently they would do that last. They would film the whole episode, and they would say, okay, this is how much time we have allotted for the drawing portions. You need to draw an identifiable car in 15 seconds. And like it has to be like artsy and good, but not.
So he had to
like,
practice
perfect.
this.
It wasn't just him. No, it wasn't him. It was never him that was drawing it.
He had a hand double for his art.
They had hand doubles that were artists that would do this. And they said they went through them constantly because people would choke under this pressure. You have to draw a car in 15 seconds, no more, no less. You have exactly 15 seconds to finish this picture, and it has to be a car.
Huh. I do remember being impressed with how effectively he would come up with this just caricature of whatever it was he was talking about that was very recognizable in that short amount of time.
But we never thought about this. Like, you just assumed they filmed it like everything else, but no, they filmed it last. So they had not the lower constraint, but the upper constraint too. So I tried it a couple of times and failed spectacularly. Give yourself an arbitrary time limit to draw a simple picture. It is incredibly hard to do.
So how do we sum all this up? I think for me, the idea is that, yeah, what I consumed was a product of its time that was created with the storytelling limitations and the commercial ideas and the values of society that led to what it being. And it was what I consumed to pass my time, to stimulate my brain, to have something to think about, to have toys to desire after, to be part of the culture of the society at the time. And that's changed. What we have today is better in almost every way because the mediums have improved, the storytelling has improved, the values have improved, and maybe something even cooler will come out next.
At some point there was, and it's always been there, I guess. There were people that were in the media, in the format, or in like these kids shows that thought, you know what, this could be more. Maybe it started with just trying to peddle toys to kids or keep their attention span, or just keep them watching the TV screen long enough to do the breakfast cereal commercials and drive sales. But at some point, these people that thought this is legitimate art, this could be more, we could be doing more good, like more and more of those people are getting into the industry. And now it really feels like a lot of these kids shows are just of such high quality. And you can tell there's a lot of care and love and research and just work that they've put into this thing that 20 or 30, no, I say 20 or 30, that was 2000, 40 years ago, people just blew off as like, oh, this is how we sell stuff to kids.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for those guys. The wizards that create things like Avatar: The Last Airbender and Bluey and those kinds of things that really elevate the art form and appreciate their role in society.
Good on you guys. Sponsor the podcast.
What did we miss, listeners? What did we not talk about that you had in mind? Please join in the discussion. Go up on our Facebook page or on our subreddit and let us know what you missed. Maybe something we can talk about in the future. Also, for a future episode, Josh had the idea that perhaps listeners could suggest maybe a hot button topic that Josh and I could debate on the program, and you would pick which side of the debate we would take. I thought this was an interesting idea. You
said hot button topic. My thought was give us something completely inane to argue about, because like, here's the thing. If you give us something like, oh, I don't know, socialized medicine to debate, like we're going to tiptoe around it because we don't want to offend people. If you say something like Captain Crunch is the best breakfast cereal, one of you be pro, one of you be con, that's going to be a much funnier discussion, I think.
Okay. And so, yeah, join us on social media if you want to join the discussion or suggest future topics for this show. We love to hear from you.
If you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show us some love, consider taking your phone out of your pocket and giving us a good review on the podcast player of your choice. If you haven't already, for everyone that has and you have been doing it, thank you so much. That helps tremendously. If you want me and Ben to sit here and talk about stupid things like children's cartoon shows and breakfast cereals, from now until the end of time, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.